Welcome back to Problematic Women. On Wednesday night, I'm sure you caught it, but President Trump reminded all of us in this country that yes, he is still winning. He touted all of his successes in the first 11 months of his administration since day one. But one promise from day one that I'm really wondering whatever happened to this was him promising that we're going to annex Canada as the 51st state. But we might find out today why that might not be such a great idea. Welcome back to Problematic Women. Welcome back to Problematic Women. I'm Elise McHugh.
I'm Virginia Allen, and we are so glad to have a very special guest in Problematic Women with us today.
Yes. Welcome.
Liana Graham.
No. So, Liana, you work at the Heritage Foundation in their Domestic Policy Center. Share just like 30 seconds. What do you do there?
I assist with the departments within domestic policy with all of their research.
Big job. Lots of issues that you cover.
I'm a professional generalist. That's kind of how I brand myself.
Well, that's what Washington, D.C. is, honestly. And as a young person, it's such a gift to come to a city where you get to explore so many different fields. Yeah. So thank you so much for taking the time to join the show today. You have a really unique background. We're going to talk more about it as we get into the show. But you are Romanian, an American, raised in Canada.
Yes.
Wild background.
Yes. I was raised in Canada. I moved there as a toddler. My parents moved there, which was funny because they fled a communist country. They fled to the United States. They had me here. Then they went to Canada, which they didn't realize at the time was turning into a communist country. I was raised in Canada, and I did an internship at Heritage last summer, and recently moved back to the United States, and I'm enjoying it. But yeah, it's all very new to me. I'm used to the Canadian political landscape, although obviously it was very in tune with everything happening in the United States. My grandmother lives in Georgia, so I'd visit very often. But it's very interesting to see Canada enter into the national political discourse in the United States. And as somebody who was raised there, I have a lot of opinions. Yeah. So I think we'll get into it at some point.
We will. We absolutely will. Well, Canada, I think, has always been decently in the news, but a little bit more so at the beginning of this year when we are nearing 1 year since Trump took office. This is our last Problematic Women of 2025. And if you think back, at least you referenced it, if you think back to the beginning of this year, Trump talked a lot about Canada. And he talked a lot about Canada becoming the 51st state. Everyone was a little bit thrown by that. We're like, and, you know, this was a sort of, I wouldn't say a policy promise, but something that was talked about. So that didn't happen. A lot of other things did happen, though, that Trump talked about in a speech on Wednesday night, touting his successes so far.
And I will say, and this is just my running conspiracy theory, that a lot of people on Twitter also agree with. And you know what? I have no proof that this didn't happen. So I'm choosing to believe it because it's funny. Not actually sure if this actually happened, but people were saying that he was planting stories and leaks that we might be going to war with Venezuela. And that's what the big announcement is, because there's a lot of wins going on in the Trump administration, and it's getting a total media blackout. So all of the mainstream media sites and news outlets were tuning into this speech on Wednesday evening, and they were like, oh, he's going to announce this. Why would he just drop this with no context that he's having this speech? And then he gets up there in front of a fireplace and a mantle with Christmas decorations, and he's like, I'm winning. Here's all the things. And it's the economy, immigration, getting rid of DEI in the military, announcing that our military members are going to get $1,776 as a warrior. What was it called?
Warrior benefit?
Warrior benefits.
Yeah.
Yes. And he was just touting his successes from the first 11 months.
Warrior dividends.
Warrior dividends. And that was actually pretty special in honor of America, 250.
Yeah, I love that he chose that number in honor of the 250th anniversary of America. But and you're right. It was like so drummed up.
Turned all eyes on him, and they had to broadcast it. They couldn't just switch to the regularly programmed CNN evening news with Caitlin Collins or whatever time slot she has. So I thought that was pretty cool. I was really expecting something big, and, you know, working in the news media, I feel like we've heard all these Trump talking points ad nauseum every single week, but it was really exciting to see it get so much coverage, anticipation, and then it's just Trump talking about his wins. And, you know what, good for him. Like, he kind of played everyone with that.
Well, I think it was fascinating to see, for one, Trump give a speech. So it was probably the shortest speech that I have ever seen him give. He started on time. When it ended, I literally said out loud, wait, it's over. It was like, hold on. And the main message, I think, was that message of affordability. That's one that the White House has really been pushing. We've talked about it here. Mr. President, you have to talk to the American people about affordability because this is where the average American is. They're concerned about the prices and they're worried about still, quite frankly, really high cost of living. And so that was the main focus of the speech. Of course, Trump also talked about successes on border and immigration. But there were things that people thought he was going to reference, like Venezuela, that he didn't.
Yes.
And so
he didn't reference it. He did reference something that was a day one thing. It wasn't Canada, but it was the egg prices. I remember people were criticizing him ad nauseum, and they were like, we just got here.
Right.
Like, do you think I can snap my fingers and do it? You know what? Maybe he could.
Yeah.
But he referenced how egg prices are down, and I kind of liked that callback to day one of his administration. Like, I actually did fix it, guys, so take that.
promises made, promises kept.
Promises made, promises kept.
You have a good Trump impersonation. I didn't realize how good your Trump impersonation was, Elise.
It's because I spend a lot of time overhearing Bradley Devlin's because our offices are close to each other. Bradley Devlin of The Signal, sit down, no plug. But
take a listen. He does have a great Trump.
He does.
Yeah.
So,
Can't relate. I'm terrible at accents, despite the fact that my parents are from an Eastern European country. I actually can only do an Eastern European accent.
Really?
That's impressive.
Okay.
Yes.
I mean, feel free to break out into
I'll
it
break out
at any
at some
time.
point if
any impressions.
any anecdote about my family comes up, I'll make sure to stick to the impression.
I love it.
Absolutely.
I
But
do love it.
yes, we didn't really hear him touch on Canada being the 51st state too much after those first initial few weeks.
Yeah.
It's kind of a joke and it's funny. And I'm kind of sad he let up on that. But we don't even see Canada to come up too much in American politics and the headlines on Twitter because we have so much of our own stuff going on. But when it does come up, it is some of the most shocking, totalitarian, scary things. And America really should not ignore this. So we just need your expertise on this.
Yeah.
What's going on in Canada?
Right. Wow, big question.
Yeah.
I think
Maybe start with that initial, because I think as we've talked with you and talked more about this issue of Canada, for one, I'm like, okay, praise God, it didn't become a 51st state. Like, I don't think we want it. But you have described it as like a totalitarian wild, wild west.
Yes.
And one of kind of those main issues that, again, like Elise said, isn't talked about too much is physician-assisted suicide. So maybe we start there.
Yes. So that is the way I like to call Canada, a totalitarian Wild West. And I like that framing because it seems a little paradoxical. A Wild West is a place where there is no law. It's an anarchy. A totalitarian state is obviously the opposite of that. It is too much government intervention into civil life, into people's religious liberty, etc. And Canada is a perfect mix of those two things. So where government should be regulating things and protecting the Canadian people, the government's not doing that. So, for example, abortion in Canada is completely deregulated. There are no abortion laws on any level of government in Canada, to the point where the Canadian law defines a human being as any person who has proceeded in a complete and living state from the body of its mother. So that is obviously an example of the government not doing enough to enforce justice to protect human life. Another example of that is euthanasia. And the reason why I use that term and not physician-assisted suicide is because there is a subtle distinction. Physician-assisted suicide is legal in 12 jurisdictions in the United States, and I think plus DC. And physician-assisted suicide entails a physician prescribing a lethal dose of medication to a patient, which they then self-administer. Whereas in Canada, what we have is euthanasia, which involves the physician actively killing the patient. So it is the physician that is, through lethal injection or whatever it is, a lethal dose of medication. That is the way in which those people are perishing. And so Canada legalized euthanasia in 2016 after a Supreme Court decision found criminal code restrictions on euthanasia to be unconstitutional, ironically, because of Section 7's right to life, liberty, and security of the person. So it's very ironic. I think that there are allusions to that kind of like legal reasoning we've seen in the United States, like substantive due process. Like we're going to see there's somehow a right hidden into this. So the Canadian justice system and Canadian judges and the judiciary is very partial to that way of interpreting legal texts, where it's not like defined, narrowly based on like the original interpretation. And then they gave Parliament a year to decide what the regulations were going to be. So Parliament had the opportunity to create a regulatory regime, which they then implemented through Bill C-14, which allowed euthanasia for those who were terminally ill and who were suffering from a serious and irremediable medical condition. And in 2021, there was a case in a superior court in Quebec that challenged those requirements on a constitutional basis. And the plaintiffs who brought the case were disability groups who maintained that the law was discriminatory towards them because they were not allowed to access euthanasia on the basis of disability. So the Quebec court ruled in their favor. The government did not object to the ruling. And so then the government reevaluated the regulations, passed another bill in 2021, removing the requirement that you had to be terminally ill in order to access euthanasia.
Wow.
So now it's sufficient for you to have any physical condition to access euthanasia. You have to have signed off by 2 physicians. There's a mandatory waiting period that they implemented as a safeguard, which I don't think is actually doing anything to safeguard because since 2016, roughly 70,000 Canadians have died through euthanasia. And in 2024, it was over 16,000.
Oh my
And
goodness.
do we know among that group, do we know who these people are, age, much about them,
Yes.
why they're choosing to do this?
Yes. And so there are 2 tracks to access euthanasia in Canada. The first track, in accordance with the first regulatory regime they implemented, are for people who are terminally ill. And disproportionately, according to Statistics Canada, people who access track 1 are above the age of 65. They're diagnosed with some terminal illness or a late stage of cancer. Track 2 euthanasia patients are those who are accessing euthanasia on the basis of a physical disability or disorder. Okay, so disabilities by definition are included in this requirement. So if you are confined to a wheelchair or if you have chronic pain that creates suffering that you consider to be intolerable, you can access this form of euthanasia. And those patients tend to be younger. They tend to be under the age of 65. And there was actually a report by the Government of Canada that said that a lot of the people accessing track 2 tend to be young women, which I find to be really interesting. I think there might be some overlap with young women and mental health issues. But there are certainly a lot of people who are choosing track 2 who are not, they don't seem to be at the end of their life. So, and a lot of I think in 2024 relative to 2023, track 2 patients increased by over 17%. So a lot of the increases we're seeing are in these groups of people who they're not dying, but they're suffering immensely. And I'm sure you might have heard about this because it's been in the news a lot, but by 2027, the Canadian government will expand eligibility criteria now to those who have mental issues. So the idea is, okay, you have physical suffering, you have a right to die on your own terms, according to the Canadian government, if you're suffering. Then the reasoning is, why are you discriminating against people with mental suffering? And ultimately, really, all people who decide to be euthanized are doing so because of existential suffering, because there's virtually no physical suffering that cannot be addressed by palliative care. So it could be that there's a physical condition that's making it worse for you, but this is producing existential despair. And I have a stat that over, I think, 86.3% of recipients of euthanasia, according to Canada's report for 2023, they cited their reason for accessing euthanasia as the loss of the ability to engage in meaningful activities. So there's absolutely a deeper emotional, spiritual, existential reason at the heart of why I think a lot of people are choosing euthanasia in Canada. Wow. Yeah, and a lot of people are also choosing it because of poverty. That's another thing. And doctors know that. So there was this one guy, Amir first sued in 2020, I want to say 2022, this story broke, where he said literally word for word, this was a CBC, I think it was CBC or City News, so Canadian news. They interviewed this guy who has a physical disability. He lives off of disability benefits from the government because he can't work. He has a severe disability that makes him suffer immensely. And he was about to basically lose his housing because he cannot survive on the disability benefits he was receiving from the government. I think it was $1,200 a month, which was not enough. The Canadian economy is bad. We could have a whole other episode on that. Affordability is a big issue for Canadians, in many Western developed countries. Affordability is a huge issue. So he couldn't survive. And so he applied for euthanasia. In Canada, you have to have 2 physicians sign off on it. He already had 1 doctor sign off on it. And here's the thing. The doctor knew the reason he was seeking euthanasia was because he didn't want to be homeless. And he literally says word for word in that interview, it always makes me emotional. Word for word, he says, I don't want to die, but I don't want to be homeless more than I don't want to die. So we know from like news stories that have broken that there are doctors who are willingly signing off on patients to be euthanized, knowing that they meet the criteria technically, but that the real reason they're seeking euthanasia is because of poverty or because of depression or other issues that they're not being able to access the care that they need in order to resolve these issues. Thankfully, because that story broke, a GoFundMe was started for him, and they amassed like $60,000. And there's the follow-up interview that they did where he was like, everything I said about my life is like the opposite now. I've got a pep in my step. And it just like goes to show like how easy it is to actually address these issues. And the government is literally failing to do that. And instead telling Canadians like, we'll just kill you instead.
It's callous, honestly. And what you said about this being expanded in 1 year is very scary. And it just shows how it's preying on the very vulnerable, the innocent, especially this past week with the House vote on Marjorie Taylor Greene's protecting minors from sex changes. It makes you think, is this going to expand to minors? Are minors going to be able to apply for euthanasia because of mental health issues? And we know that Gen Z and Gen Alpha have so many mental health issues. They're just getting thrown like Zoloft at them like crazy. So it's just like, this is a snowball.
Where does it stop?
Where does it stop? And what position does this put the physicians, the nurses, the doctors in?
It puts them in a difficult position. There was a report, a long article released in The Atlantic in August of this year that was all about euthanasia in Canada. And I think it was called like Canada legalized assisted suicide and doctors are struggling to keep up with demand. And when I said earlier, like the Supreme Court said it was unconstitutional to have those limits, then Parliament had to create some regulation. And a lot of these regulations were not really well defined. So the article kind of goes into what happened with the doctors. Like they were kind of thrown into this arena. They don't know how to, like, what is an irremediable condition? What is incurability? What is a grievance? Like, how do I judge all of this sort of stuff? So it puts them in a really difficult situation. I read a report from physicians in Ontario, which was following up on, these are family physicians, by the way. So in Canada, you've got to have 2 doctors sign off. It doesn't have to be a family physician, although many of them are. Imagine if it's so hard for family physicians who know the patient so well, how much harder do you think it could be for a doctor who's never met this patient, met them on their first day? There are many physicians in Canada who provide euthanasia upon just maybe meet somebody and they just, stamp, okay, there you go. So this is for family physicians. And these family physicians talk about they're struggling to understand if this person is asking for euthanasia because of the disability or is it because of a mental illness. And they cite concerns that this person has depression, or they cite concerns that they're really seeking euthanasia for those reasons. So it seems that they're even themselves unsure that they can judge capacity. Like how do they do that? You know what I mean? It's very confusing. There was one doctor as well in this article in The Atlantic that was talking about a patient who came to her in his 30s, diagnosed with a curable form of cancer, around 65% chance of survival, and he wanted euthanasia. And according to the regulatory code now, because now they had to define, because doctors are like, what does it mean to be incurable? Canadian interpretation of that is if none of the treatments are acceptable to you. So let's say you've got cancer and like you don't want chemo, you refuse treatment, even though it's treatable, that's technically, it's incurable because you're refusing treatment. So that patient was incurable by definition, even though he could have been cured if he had accepted the treatment. Wow. And so this doctor was like, I don't know like what to do here. She was expressing concern with her colleagues. She ultimately did end up euthanizing him. So he died in his 30s. Jeez. And I think she wrote in the article that she really regretted it. Yeah. So it's really,
it's like putting them in a position where they're being asked to play God almost. And it sounds like a lot of them, they never asked to be put in that position. They don't want to be in that position, but lawmakers have essentially decided, no, that's a responsibility that now as a doctor or as a nurse in Canada that has to be on your shoulders. Yeah. And just as you're speaking, Liana, I'm thinking, for one, going back to the story of the man who didn't want to be homeless, and like how powerful that the community stepped up. Yeah. But you really recognize, where does the role of society and where does the role of government like begin and end, right? Because it's almost like government has said, okay, we have these people that have problems, they're depressed, they're have these really, really serious health conditions, and at least in Canada, their solution has been, well, we'll just let them kill themselves. And society's answer is, no, we're going to wrap our arms around them. We're going to support them. And like at the end of the day, like what better lesson on government and the role of government versus society? Like when we talk about civil society, like this is the role. Like it's actually not the government's job to take care of our every need. It's their job to set boundaries and ensure public safety, those types of things. And, you know, ensure laws are being executed properly, all of that. But it's society's job to really provide practical support, to be neighbors. Like this is in all of us. It's in our DNA, and it's uncomfortable because when we do that, you know, we have to get our hands dirty. You know, we're working and we're surrounded by people that, you know, have maybe pretty serious, you know, life-threatening illnesses or mental health issues. And so in that way, I think for society too, it can be easier to just be like, oh, this feels yucky. I'm confronted with humanity and frailty, and it's uncomfortable, and it takes time, and I'm getting nothing out of it. And so in that sense, that idea of euthanasia also becomes easier. But once again, it's like, okay, you know, looking at obviously from a biblical standpoint, it's like this is what we're called to do as Christians, as human beings, is love one another. But then also this is how societies flourish, is when we step up and help one another. And so just, I so applaud those people that in that situation stepped up, and I'm like, man, I wish all, not only Canada, but for the rest of the world, even here in America, where we've seen this begin to be embraced, could recognize like, okay, this is the example of what should be happening, how we should be wrapping our arms. But maybe let's talk a little bit about how we prevent this from leaking down, down into the United States.
Yeah, which it is, by the way, not to be too black-pilled, but literally it is. Like there are, I mean, Governor Hochul just said that she's going to sign the assisted suicide bill in New York. Now, people who are advocates of assisted suicide might say that the Canadian regime is a bit much, but I would argue that when you read the reasoning or hear the reasoning of people who advocate for assisted suicide in the United States, it's very similar to the rhetoric we heard in Canada. And I mean,
it's a slippery slope.
It's a slippery slope, and this was legalized not too long ago. So you can see how quickly things have changed. Like we're not that far away. I think one problem politically, culturally, socially is when we don't recognize the depravity of human nature. We don't recognize just how bad we are. I think Solzhenitsyn, I can never say his name, once said that we've got to reckon with, we all have a Nazi prison guard in each one of us. And the point is that like we could do that too if we're not careful. That it's not like, you know, it takes like a particularly depraved person. It takes like an ordinary person exposed to the right conditions. So we need to prevent that from happening here. I mean, just look at what they did in China with the one-child policy. You never would have thought that that could have happened, and it's not too far away in our human history. So what do we do to prevent that in the United States? I think we need to cultivate a culture of life that is unashamed and unmoved in its commitment to viewing all human beings as possessing equal and inherent dignity. Because ultimately at the very heart of euthanasia and abortion and all of these issues that we're seeing in Canada comes down to government deciding whose lives are worth living and whose lives are not worth living on the basis of some factor, either this person's subjective evaluation, which in that case we get the slippery slope, because if it's based on your subjective evaluation, why are you denying this right to some other people? If that makes sense. Like that's what the disability groups are arguing. The mental health advocates are saying, we want to have, if euthanasia is just healthcare, which is what it's being marketed as, and you have a right to healthcare, why are we limiting who gets to access it based on these principles? So then there's that problem. So I think that we need to be very committed to seeing human beings as possessing equal inherent dignity. And ultimately, the question I think that is most helpful to ask when you're thinking about like the problem of euthanasia is, how do you decide between when to give suicide prevention and when to give suicide assistance? And in the United States, it seems like in the states that do have this legalized, the answer is, does this person have a kind of disability? Which is what a disability group in Delaware is alleging now. They've filed a lawsuit against the state of Delaware, which legalized assisted suicide, saying that it violates federal law, that's anti-discrimination law, because if I were to walk into a clinic in Delaware as a healthy young woman and express suicidal ideation, they would put me in a hospital. They would act to prevent me from doing that. But if I walked in with a terminal illness, which is a kind of a disability, so all people who are terminally ill are disabled, not all people who are disabled are terminally ill, but terminal illness is a disability. So if you walk in with a disability, a life-threatening disability, instead of providing you with life-assisting care, they assist you in the taking of your own life. They point you towards assisted death. So that is the claim, and I think it's a very strong one, that this hinges upon picking some sort of factors that ultimately say that these lives are worth living, these lives are not worth living, which when applied, like, in society, I think will beget very bad effects down the line. It will create a slippery slope of, like, just the vast dehumanization. Just think about the cultural implications, like the downstream effects of scheduling your death the way you'd schedule a dentist appointment. You know, like, I kind of haven't really thought, I haven't teased it out too much, but like just thinking about, like, that's so weird to think about. It's like weirdly dystopian.
You can't think
Very
too hard
dystopian.
about it.
Yeah.
It's
Just very strange.
Very George Orwell.
It's not okay at all. Like, there's a very famous book by Leo Tolstoy. It's called The Death of Ivan Ilyich. I highly recommend it to anyone who's not read it. But it's about a man who's dying, and in it talks about, like, how he just longs for somebody to, like, cry over him and grieve him, and like the way a mother would coddle a child. And there's this deep human desire to be seen and heard and loved because it values his life. It says that, you know, we're so sad and grieved by this condition you're in because of how much we love you. Just think how weird it is to, like, sterilize that and just treat it like a, you know, like any other appointment. That's the way, like, maid providers, as they're called, talk about it. You know, it's very weird. Like, there was this one woman who found out her son wanted to get euthanized in Canada. He was 23, and he had, like, a visual impairment or something. So he had some sort of disability. I think she knew it was because he was depressed. Anyways, she didn't know about it until, like, she found it in his email. It was like, oh, okay. So then she called the clinic and posed as, like, somebody seeking euthanasia and, like, basically recreated the symptoms her son has to see how easy it would be to, like, get it. And it was super easy. Like, he was like, okay, I'm gonna send you this form, I'll sign it. And, like, I think she asked about bringing a dog into the clinic, and he was like, yeah, as long as somebody's around to, like, take him out once it's done. Like, it's, like, such a weird way. You're, like, scheduling when to kill somebody. And it's like, yeah, you can bring your dog in. Just make sure somebody will be around to, like, bring him out when he's... It was just, like, weird. I don't like it.
So
weird.
Strange, right? It's very dystopian. I dislike it at all. And I think a lot of this happens behind closed doors. And I don't think a lot of Canadians are, like, really super aware. I don't think a lot of Americans are aware of what's going on in Canada. I don't think they're aware of how it manifests in the United States. But based on what I saw in Canada and what I'm seeing in Canada, seeing how much this is spreading across the United States, and seeing, by the way, the advocacy groups that are lobbying for this utilize the same rhetoric, the same arguments. They have even the same names. Like, the same, like, dying with dignity, or death with dignity, these ideas. These are the same ideas they evoked in Canada. So I don't know how that's going to not happen here unless there is a robust argument developed against it, utilizing all the available resources that we have. The federal government can act in enforcing, you know, anti-discrimination law, and states can act by vetoing these bills, and people within these states can rise up and say, like, we're not going to accept this culturally. We're going to take the opposite approach, as they did in the case of Amir Farsood. Like, we're going to band together and show that this person's life is worth living. So actually, I don't have the precise number, but I did read in the report in 2023, there was a percentage of people who ultimately ended up changing their minds because, like, circumstances had changed. And so one woman I follow who is, like, an advocate against euthanasia was like, be that person. You know, like, ultimately, like, we can also advocate for political change, we can advocate for cultural awareness, but on a, like, microcosmic personal level, just, like, be that person that would prevent that, like, from happening to your friend. Like, be the resource, be the village, right? You've got to be a villager to build a village. So also, like, embrace things that are inconvenient to you. Like, if somebody needs to drive somewhere, I don't know, like, small things like that.
Just
like,
show up.
Show up.
You know, we've talked about the timeline, and in a way, it feels like this happened really fast in Canada. And in another way, when you kind of zoom out and look at Canada's history, it's like this might have been a little bit of a slower burn than we realize.
Yes, I think that is an astute observation. I think that requires a bit of teasing out. I think that the vast secularization of Canada as a country has led to this ultimately because politics is downstream from culture. And, like, what is the culture that created the conditions for us to regard human beings as having inherent equal dignity? Christian culture.
Yeah.
Western culture is based upon those principles.
Yeah.
So as a society embraces rapid secularization and multiculturalism, which basically says that all these cultures are equal, there's not one better than the other, which has been the position of Canada since at least the 70s. So that's a long time ago. This didn't just start with Justin Trudeau. Actually, not a lot of people might know this. Okay, it's going to come as a shock. But did you know that Canada's flag today is not the flag that many Canadians grew up with?
No.
I grew up with this flag, but the original flag, there were many versions of the flag.
Okay.
One of the most iconic versions, it's called the Red Ensign, was changed in 1965. It basically looks like, I should have brought a photo of it. It's a red flag with the Union Jack and then the Canadian shield.
Okay.
The Canadian shield is like an emblem that represents the founders of Canada. The Scottish, the Irish, the English, the French, they've got the fleur-de-lis. So it's a beautiful flag with an homage to Canada's history.
Yeah.
Very similar to the flag of the United States. There's a story there. You can explain it. And it's an allusion to the history, and in that way, it's very traditional. So when the flag was changed, it was changed by an act of Parliament. The traditionalists, the Conservatives in Parliament, were very opposed for obvious reasons. The flag ended up changing, and I think it's emblematic of the shift Canada embraced in the 60s away from the British Empire, British tradition, British common law, which is very much predicated on the Westminster tradition, the rule of law, Christianity, etc., towards like globalism. And one of the first people, I think actually probably the first person in like the national political stage to say diversity is strength was Pierre Elliott Trudeau. Like he really like embraced...
The father of Justin Trudeau.
Yes, the father of Justin Trudeau, which not a lot of people know.
It's not Fidel Castro.
No. A lot of people say that. And then I'm like, but when I look at Justin Trudeau's policies, he's very much his father's son.
Yes.
But he does bear an uncanny resemblance to Fidel Castro.
Is there a possibility it could be both somehow?
Anything is possible.
Spiritually fathered by Castro.
Uncle.
Yeah, I guess also spiritually there are resemblances with his, collectivism and statism. But all that to say, Canada has embraced multiculturalism essentially as dogma to the point where there's a really famous ad released. Have you heard of Molson Joe? It's a beer company.
Okay.
Molson?
Oh, I have not heard of it, but...
No? Okay, well, I'm not a beer drinker. My husband is a beer drinker. I have it written out. So this is a really famous ad from the 90s. I think it was released in the 2000s.
Okay.
So this was played all over Canada. I think it was at hockey events to the point where it was so popular, children in school would repeat it. So it's a man getting up and he's like, this is what it means to be a Canadian. And his name is Molson Joe because Molson is the beer company. And he says, I'm not a lumberjack or a fur trader. I don't live in an igloo, eat blubber, or own a dog sled. I have a prime minister, not a president. I speak English and French, not American. And I pronounce it about, not about. I can proudly sew my country's flag on my backpack. I believe in peacekeeping, not policing, diversity, not assimilation. My name is Joe, and I'm a Canadian. I remember, when I first read that, I was like, this is in 2000. The seeds were planted for this very early on.
The writing has been on the wall.
Yes.
And it reminds me of that Kamala Harris ad where it's a bunch of burly men, and they're like, I'm a man, and I can vote for a woman.
Yeah.
I'm a man, and I believe in a woman's right to an abortion.
Legs crossed on the back of the truck.
Yes.
Like this. And I'm like,
it's very performative.
Very performative.
And it's projection. It's almost like Canada's aware and is insecure of its lack of a national identity and is trying to create something up from the scraps, piece something together.
Well, it goes to show that when it's not rooted in something godly, it's just based on these very modern ideas, things start to crumble and crumble fast because yes, the groundwork has been laid, but
there's always going to be a new modern idea.
Exactly.
It's we'll take that one.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that is probably one of the biggest things that's buffer between this leaking into America is we have such a strong Christian identity. You were also talking about how Americans are fighters and Canadians are not. Can we get into that? Because that was a very interesting thing you mentioned before the show.
So, one way to understand or ascertain the culture and spirit of a country in one way is just to look to its origin. What is its origin story? And the origin story of the United States is a rebellion against tyranny. And in that way, rebelliousness is in America's DNA, for better or for worse. Americans are very argumentative. I like that about this culture.
Totally.
Very honest, very blunt, very go-getter. The Canadian origin story is like the exact opposite of that, because Canada was founded by people who fled during the Revolution, who pledged loyalty to the crown, not just the person occupying the crown at the time, but just like the empire, British tradition. They wanted to remain British citizens. And that was when Canada was born. Canada initially was a confederation of states. 1867 is when that happened. And so loyalists, by definition, do not question what the government does. So I think it's very unique that you've got this trickle-down effect from the very founding of Canada. Canadians were loyal to the government, and to this day, that is something, an attitude that permeates the Canadian political discourse and like the view Canadians have towards politics. I mean, many people were shocked when Mark Carney was elected, or the Liberal Party won, after 10 years of Liberal reign under Justin Trudeau. And the Canadian country, it was destroyed as a result of his policies. It's like, how could this possibly happen? Like, only a Canadian could vote like this. I mean, I'm sorry, it sounds really harsh, but like, there needs to be a wake-up call. And a lot of it has to do with the culture of like, we don't talk about politics at the dinner table, and we don't question authority. Statism is probably the biggest issue in Canadian politics, like this view of government as the solution for literally everything, to the point where even conservatives have embraced this to a certain point. The provincial party in Ontario, so there's the Conservative Party, which is the federal Conservative Party, and then there are like provincial versions of that, so like statewide versions of that. The Ontario Conservative Party is called the Progressive Conservative Party of Ontario. It's literally an oxymoron. Like, this is how like the Conservatives in Canada are not socially conservative, and they're not very. It doesn't seem like they're very interested in like preserving Canadian traditions and culture. They're more concerned about like balancing the budget, I guess. And I think a lot of Gen Z are tired of this talk. I mean, obviously affordability is a big issue, but I actually think it is tied to culture, I think.
Absolutely. Everything plays into each other. And that's actually very interesting. You started talking about Justin Trudeau. So he was your prime minister for most of your life, for 10 years, 2015 to recently, right? Yeah. So what was that like growing up with him as your prime minister? Because in my head, that's like if Obama got into office and just stayed there and then now I'm here. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of Americans, when I tell them that our prime minister was there for 10 years, or like 10 years. Like, they forget. And I honestly, I forget, like, no term limits in Canada. So definitely was very familiar with Justin Trudeau's policy as a kid. I actually remember when he won, and I was happy because I was a progressive in elementary school. My father was so mad. He was, like, totally on the Stephen Harper train, very much conservative. So it was like swimming in the wokest waters imaginable, I guess. I don't know. I mean, it's like waking up every day thinking, like, this country is the laughingstock of the world. Like, what is going on? It's like Alice in Wonderland levels of insanity. Justin Trudeau, I mean, ushered in so much DEI, so much SRHR, sexual reproductive health and rights, sending millions of dollars overseas for nonsense while Canadians are suffering on the street. Euthanasia was legalized under his administration when he was prime minister. So it was when he was in parliament that happened. So, I mean, you think about all the things that Canadians are known for today in a bad way in American political discourse, a lot of it can be traced back to Justin Trudeau and the legacy he left of wokeism. He committed to having a completely equally divided cabinet. So 50% of his cabinet were women. Like, he literally, when somebody asked him about why, he was like, because it's 2015. It's like, okay, dude. So, like, basically just being embarrassed all the time. Like, what are you even doing?
Embarrassed all the time. I felt embarrassed just, like, with 1 year of Joe Biden, let alone 4. And Joe Biden's years radicalized me. Did Justin Trudeau radicalize a whole new generation of Gen Z conservatives?
Radical to the establishment, and it's like, it shouldn't be radical to say that I want my culture back. Thank you. Like, okay, well, that's radical though. So yes, to the establishment, super radical. I mean, many young conservatives in Canada, and I say conservative with a little c because that also could be like a partisan affiliation. I mean, ideological conservatives who care about their country, care about their culture, and they don't want to see it be vanquished before their very eyes, which is literally what is happening. Canada has mass immigration. Canada just passed a law granting citizenship to second generation Canadians. So if your grandfather was born in Canada, then your dad was born in the United Kingdom, and then you were born in the United States, you could become a Canadian citizen, no questions asked now.
Wow.
There's a lot of immigration from parts of the world that many Canadians would say they're bringing cultures that are not compatible with our own, religions that are not Christian, and eroding the foundation of Canadian culture, which, I mean, a traditionalist would say has to do with Christianity. You go to Parliament, and guess what is inscribed all throughout Parliament? Verses of scripture, the Psalms. Actually, Canada used to be referred to as the Dominion of Canada, which is a reference to a chapter in the book of Psalms, and the Latin phrase underneath Canada, usque mare, something along those lines, means from sea to sea. He shall have dominion from sea to sea, because Canada is a continental country, so it's literally an allusion to the Book of Psalms. You tell a Canadian this and they'll be scandalized. I mean, of course, Americans often say, conservatives here, this is a Christian country, which it is. Very true. So is Canada. But you say that in Canada, all of a sudden you're a radical, you're a theocratic, whatever. Like, no, I'm actually
How dare
just
you point out a fact?
Yeah, I'm just I don't know, well read in history. Like, how can you deny this? So I think that especially young men, they feel very alienated by the political class, and they want their grievances to be heard. Affordability, immigration. It's interesting because it's the same issues that we see or hear about in Gen Z in this country.
Yeah.
And the great thing about America, I love this country. And when I hear Americans talk about mass immigration, knowing that the amount of mass immigration that is experienced here is like but a fraction of what Canadians are experiencing, and yet the harshest response is from Americans, great. This is how it should be.
So we got to preserve
it. Be very protective of your culture.
Yeah.
Love it. Cherish it. Does not mean that you're being harsh towards the outsider. It just means you love the people here and you want to protect the condition. Honestly, the
Protect
reason...
your family.
Absolutely. And the reason why immigrants want to come to the United States is what you're trying to preserve.
Yeah.
It's actually the underlying Christian framework that made this country great. So if an immigration system erodes at that foundation, it's actually not going to be a desirable place for people to immigrate to anymore. So there's actually an argument to be made there that, like, actually it's pro-immigration to preserve the country because it's preserving the very reason why people want to move there. It's preserving the American dream. So it's just very sad to see one that happened in Canada. It's important for Americans to know about it because, honestly, every single talking point that the left brings up, the Democratic Party and the radical wing of the Democratic Party that they bring up is literally what Canada has done. So it's like a twin experiment. It's like you've got two nations, both founded relatively around the same time by people from relatively around the same part of Europe, and you make one, and honestly they share like geographically very similar regions, are right next to each other. It's perfect. This is like sociologists would be ecstatic to have such conditions. It's like, let's see what happens. We've got one country that implements this political system, we've got one country implementing another, and leftist policies and embracing everything the left wants, and then you see what has happened. Mass fragmentation of individuals, of identities, of communities, leading to existential despair, euthanasia numbers through the roof, abortion numbers very high, no regulation on abortion, which is insane, and like people think you're crazy for saying that. Like, okay, a woman who's pregnant in Canada, the person who killed her cannot be charged with double homicide in Canada. That's what the left wants here, basically, because that's the Canadian model is just logically consistent. It's literally, they're just consistent.
Yeah.
So I love pointing to that and being like, Democrats here, do you support that? A lot of them say that they do. And then you can point out all the terrible stories of justice denied to individuals who died
stems from that.
because they were in utero.
Yeah.
Right? So, I could talk about this for hours, obviously, but my one like word to Americans would be to take heed, to see Canada as a warning, essentially, and to not think it's too far off. Like, Canadians are not stupid. Like, the foundations were there, and they were eroded by a political class that did not care about them, that put ideology over reality. And that is precisely what the left wants to do here, and in honestly many places looks like they're succeeding.
I mean, we see it with Zoran Mamdani, the mayor of New York City, and a lot of people elected him because they were like, we just want something different. We're unhappy with the status quo. Yeah, he says he's a socialist, but maybe this time it's going to work. And it sounds pretty good what he's putting out there, but it's like, okay, look literally just a few miles north and see that it actually doesn't work out in the long run or even in the short term, you know?
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
Well, I think it's like if you ever needed a reminder of like why we're fighting, why we do what we do, why as Americans we have a reason to preserve what we have. Like just look at Canada. Like there's a weird, I feel like in this conversation I'm experiencing all these different emotions. Like there's discouragement over what's happening in Canada, and there's like I'm signing up again. It's like we can't become that. And you know, if the left has their way, it won't be very long before America is Canada 2.0.
Right.
And so we have all the more reason, and I think especially headed into 2026, it's like, okay, we're celebrating our 250th anniversary as a country. What a better time to sign up again and say, no, we are more committed than ever to the values our country was founded on, to preserving freedom, life, and liberty. Let's go. It's an exciting time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, one last thing I wanted to touch on, because this is just a little fun way to end the episode. This was kind of my extent of thinking about Canada over the past few weeks. What is going on with Justin Trudeau and Katy Perry dating? Is she like the American ambassador to Canada now? Is she?
Maybe she should move there. It seems like she'd fit in with our culture.
Bridging
Canadian
culture. Is she bridging that divide?
When I saw that news break, I thought, this is what he should have been doing for the past 10 years. Not running a country. Like, he's honestly very suited for the public image, I guess. Yeah, celebrity life. And I think that was one of the main grievances Canadians had with him as a prime minister, because he came across as so unserious. It's like, okay, you'd honestly be a good fit for Hollywood. So honestly, all more power to him.
Isn't that the case with a lot of politicians? Like they just are failed Hollywood actors, and then they come to politics. He
was a failed drama teacher, so I don't know if you knew that, but
it's even worse.
Yeah, I think a lot of Canadians during like the trucker convoy, they sported hats that were like, "Make Justin Trudeau a drama teacher again."
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of politicians that should probably just be in Hollywood instead, we asked last week our audience to weigh in on Jasmine Crockett. Our question of the week was, is Jasmine Crockett a force for the GOP to fear? Hands down, you all said no. With lots of laughing emojis. I think Katie, you had one of the funniest answers. You said her eyelashes could cause someone to fly away if they get too close and she blinks fast. So, thanks, Katie, for
she's trying to fly away.
Bringing us some humor. Genuinely Dre said Texas didn't even want Beto O'Rourke. So true. Yeah.
And she's taking the Beto strategy by saying, I don't even need Trump voters. So.
Yeah, I know. And then Spencer P. 1969 wrote, please run. We love dem morons running. So you all do not mince words. We love hearing your feedback. And this week, we're going to lighten the mood a little bit for our question of the week during the week of Christmas. And we want to know, what traditions, Christmas traditions specifically, do you have that are the most American? Like, what is the most American thing your family does on or around Christmas? We want to know. Get creative, guys. I love this. And if you don't have a super American family tradition, maybe it's a good year to introduce one. But it is our last episode of 2025. Wild. Been an amazing year. Thank you all for one, like, man, we've had an awesome team here this year, and like just great people, amazing guests. And thank you to all of our listeners for just your constant support, for following us, for being a part of the Problematic Women family. We are so grateful and so thankful to you all. And thanks for supporting all of our awesome guests as well. Liana, for those that want to follow your research, your writing, your spouting off, how can they do that?
You can find me on Instagram at Liana Gordon, I think. Oh no, Liana Graham now. I think I couldn't change my Twitter handle when I got married.
Congrats on your recent marriage.
Thank you. My Twitter handle, I believe, is still Liana Gordon, but like Liana Graham basically on virtually every social media platform. Amazing. You'd be able to find me.
We'll put that in the show notes so you guys can follow her. Thank you. It was such a joy to have you on and just pop off about what America should look out for as we enter our 250th birthday, because it is so worth fighting for. And it's not just worth fighting for because we love it, but because we need it.
Yeah, and sometimes it's good just to hear from an outsider's perspective. I often say, coming to the United States and living here, it's like the difference between seeing things with glasses versus without glasses. And I think it's like, I've got the glasses on, I can see with such clarity how amazing this country is, because when you live in a disaster, basically, you grow up in it and you come to to the United States, like a paradise. And that's not to knock unnecessarily on Canada. I think Canada love Canada should change. So it's just a warning to the Americans and to keep holding down the fort to, fight the good fight. Basically.
Yeah, absolutely. What a good way to end 2025. We will be back here with you to celebrate, to ring in the new year on January 3rd. But until then, have a very Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. Thank you, Problematic Women family. We'll see you in 2026.